Hello, thank you for joining us and welcome to the new ESEA Coordinator Training Series. In this video, we will be providing a brief overview of working with ESEA federal grant programs. Every year, the U.S. Department of Education makes funding available under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, or ESEA, to support the implementation of various federal education programs across the country. These federal tax dollars are made available to states like Maine by way of a formal funding application. Upon federal approval of the state's funding application, Maine can begin to access and award ESEA funding out to eligible school districts to support the needs of local school communities. This graphic serves to illustrate both how the flow of funding reaches schools in Maine, as well as the accountability for how such funds are used. Local school districts are accountable to the state of Maine, and the state is in turn accountable to the U.S. Department of Education and to Congress. The work you do locally is incredibly important, not only in supporting students, teachers, and families, but also in ensuring that our state maintains good standing with the federal government. Carrying out quality program services and tracking reporting of program information can help ensure that Maine continues to receive and is able to provide ESEA funding for school districts across our state. The ESEA includes several different education programs within it. For now, we will focus on the 5 programs included within the department's ESEA funding application. Those programs are Title I Part A, Title II Part A, Title III Part A, Title IV Part A, and Title V Part B. These programs make up the department's ESEA consolidated application, and eligible school districts may apply for funding from these programs on an annual basis. For more information on each of these programs, including more comprehensive rules and examples of both allowable and unallowable expenditures under each program, please visit the department's website. There, you will find a comprehensive spending handbook covering each of the ESEA programs, as well as shorter snapshot guides that are specific to each program. These are helpful resources for not only determining whether certain expenses are allowable under a particular grant, but also for generating ideas on how your school district might wish to leverage these federal funds. Eligible school districts across the state may apply for ESEA funding each year that funds are made available by the federal government. All ESEA funding applications must be submitted and approved through the department's online grant management system. The level of funding each school district is eligible to receive is predetermined by the Maine Department of Education using funding formulas established by the U.S. Department of Education and by Congress. These funding formulas, while different for each program, often consider similar things such as U.S. Census numbers and poverty data. From start to finish, the ESEA consolidated application process takes roughly 6 months to complete. Districts can begin the review of data and planning processes at any time, but this work typically takes place during the few months that precede the August 1st submission deadline for the ESEA application. Be sure to build in enough time to effectively plan for and develop your district's ESEA consolidated application, as well as obtain the appropriate signatures needed for submission. These signatures are obtained electronically through the department's online grant management system, and each application will require digital signatures from school principals, the district's business manager, and the superintendent. State review of ESEA consolidated applications occurs throughout the summer and fall, with most applications receiving final approval before the end of the calendar year. The department's ability to quickly and effectively review and approve funding applications depends on both the quality of the application that is originally submitted and the timeliness of school district responses to comments on needed revisions or updates. Some approvals do occur quicker than others, particularly when school districts are able to keep with the 2-week turnaround time on responses to feedback from the department. There are 2 levels of state approval for each ESEA consolidated application the department receives. The first level of state approval is known as substantial approval and constitutes the time at which a school district can begin to obligate ESEA funds for various expenses. Substantial approval requires an ESEA consolidated application to meet all of the basic grant requirements and that all project budgets include reasonable and allowable expenditures. The second level of approval, known as final approval, requires a more thorough and comprehensive review of the submitted application by the department. As part of this review, all grant requirements must be met with well-defined projects, budgets, and proposed outcomes. Final approval constitutes the point in time where a school district may begin seeking payments for various grant programs and approved expenditures. There may be instances where both substantial and final approval levels are granted to an ESEA consolidated application at the same time. However, these instances are somewhat uncommon, and school districts should be aware of the likelihood that their funding application may require amendments or revisions prior to the department being able to grant either substantial or final approval. Once an ESEA consolidated application has received final approval, the submitting school district may begin to access federal grant funds for allowable expenditures. The Maine Department of Education administers each of its federal grant programs on a reimbursement model. This means that all grant recipients must first expend their own funds on allowable grant activities and then seek reimbursement from the department for those expenditures. Payment requests are typically submitted on a monthly or quarterly basis by each district's business manager. In some school districts, someone else within the district's business office may be designated as the individual who will submit reimbursement requests on behalf of the district. Both of these examples are fine, so long as the individual submitting payment requests is not also overseeing the implementation of programs and activities being funded through ESEA programs. There must be a clear separation between who is overseeing ESEA work and who is seeking reimbursement from the department for allowable grant expenditures. Generally speaking, expenses that have been explicitly outlined within a state-approved ESEA consolidated application can be included in a district's request for reimbursement. There are exceptions to this rule, however, particularly when a school district is somewhat vague in their proposed project narratives and expenditures. For any expense to be considered allowable, it must also be supplemental in nature and not supplant other federal, state, or local funds that might otherwise pay for an expense. In other words, be sure to only seek reimbursement for expenses related to programs and activities that would otherwise not be possible without ESEA funding. All costs must also pass a simple set of tests outlined in EDGAR, which asks whether proposed costs are reasonable, necessary, allocable, and allowable. If you're ever in doubt as to whether a particular expenditure would be allowable under a particular program, please be sure to reach out to your ESEA Regional Program Manager before committing funds for such an expense. If you commit the funds prior to seeking state approval, you run the risk of the expense being deemed unallowable and needing to absorb the cost locally or pay for it through other non-federal funding. In this context, it is always better to seek permission before committing funds for questionable expenditures. That concludes this training video. For additional resources and further training, please visit the department's website at the URL provided. For support with specific questions, please be sure to reach out to your ESEA Regional Program Manager. Thank you again for joining us today, and we wish you the best in your new role as an ESEA coordinator.